In 1971, something happened that changed everything about money, and you weren't told about it. Right now, as you're watching this, a handful of people you've never heard of are making decisions that will determine whether your savings survive the next decade. They're not elected. They answered no one, and they control something more powerful than any army. Your money. Let me ask you something. When you think about who runs the world, who comes to mind? Presidents? Prime ministers? Tech billionaires? Here's what keeps me up at night. None of them actually control the one thing that controls everything else. Money. I'm talking about the ability to create money out of thin air, to decide how much your savings are worth tomorrow, to determine whether your country thrives or collapses. And the terrifying part? This power sits in the hands of institutions most people have never even heard of. Let's start with the obvious one. Your country's central bank. In America, it's the Federal Reserve. In Europe, the European Central Bank. In the UK, the Bank of England. Every major nation has one. Now here's what they don't teach you in school. These aren't government agencies. Not really. The Federal Reserve, for example, was created in 1913 on Jekyll Island by a secret group of bankers. Yes, actual bankers. And to this day, it operates independently from the U.S. government. The president can't fire the Fed chairman midterm. Congress can't override their decisions. Think about that. The institution that controls the world's reserve currency answers to no elected official. But what exactly do central banks do? They set interest rates. When you hear the Fed raised rates, what that really means is they're making it more expensive for everyone to borrow money. Your mortgage gets pricier. Credit cards cost more. Businesses slow down hiring. One decision affects hundreds of millions of lives. They also do something called quantitative easing. That's Wall Street speak for printing money, literally creating trillions of dollars that didn't exist before. During the 2008 financial crisis, the Fed printed $4 trillion. During COVID, another $5 trillion. Where did that money come from? Nowhere. They typed numbers into a computer. And here's the part that should terrify you. When they print money, your savings become worth less. If there's suddenly twice as much money floating around but the same amount of stuff to buy, prices go up. Your purchasing power goes down. You work your whole life for that retirement fund. And someone in an office you'll never visit can cut its value in half without asking your permission. But central banks don't work alone. They coordinate. In 2008, when Lehman Brothers collapsed, central banks around the world held emergency conference calls. Within 48 hours, they all started printing money at the same time. Different countries, different currencies, but synchronized perfectly. How? Because they all report to the same place. There's a building in Basel, Switzerland that most people will never see. It's called the Bank for International Settlements. The BIS. It's the central bank for central banks. Think about that phrase. The bank that banks go to when they need money. The BIS was founded in 1930, and here's what makes it different from every other financial institution on Earth. It's completely above the law. According to its charter, the BIS has immunity from all national jurisdiction. It pays no taxes. Its archives are inviolable. Its buildings can't be entered by police. Its staff can't be arrested. If you try to create an organization with these privileges today, people would call you insane. But exists, and it's been operating for almost a century. Every 2 months, the heads of the world's major central banks fly to Basel for secret meetings. No press, no minutes released to the public, no transcripts. What do they discuss? Global monetary policy, exchange rates, which countries get access to emergency funding and which don't. In these meetings, they decide the direction of the global economy, and you're not invited. Your elected representatives aren't invited. Nobody's watching. The BIS employs about 600 people. These 600 people have more influence over your financial future than any politician you've ever voted for. Here's a real example. In the early 2000s, the BIS was warning about risky lending practices by banks. They saw the housing bubble forming. Did they stop it? No, because they don't have that power officially. Instead, they gave guidance to central banks. Suggestions, recommendations. Those suggestions were ignored. And the 2008 financial crisis destroyed $30 trillion of global wealth. Nobody at the BIS was fired. Nobody was prosecuted. The institution kept operating exactly as before. Because here's the thing about the BIS. It doesn't see itself as working for countries. It sees itself as maintaining the stability of the global financial system. And sometimes, maintaining that system means letting people lose their homes. But having power is one thing. Exercising it requires infrastructure. This is where SWIFT comes in. SWIFT stands for Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. It sounds boring. It's anything but. Imagine every international transaction, every wire transfer between banks, every time money crosses a border, it has to go through a messaging system. SWIFT is that system. It handles about 45 million messages per day. That's trillions of dollars moving around the planet every 24 hours. Here's why this matters. SWIFT isn't just a neutral pipe. It's a weapon. When the U.S. wanted to punish Iran, they didn't send troops. They kicked Iran out of SWIFT. Suddenly, Iranian banks couldn't communicate with the rest of the world. Their economy collapsed. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the West kicked Russian banks out of SWIFT. Overnight, Russia was financially isolated. But here's the uncomfortable question. Who decides who gets kicked out? SWIFT is based in Belgium, but it's controlled by a board that includes representatives from American and European banks. And it follows directives from the U.S. Treasury and the European Central Bank. So it's a neutral global financial system that somehow always aligns with Western foreign policy. See the problem? Countries like China and Russia are now building alternative systems. China has CIPS. Russia has SBFS. They're small now, but they're growing. Because when you weaponize the global financial system, other countries start building bunkers. Let's say your country runs into trouble. You borrowed too much. Your currency is collapsing. Inflation is out of control. There's one place left to turn, the International Monetary Fund. The IMF has 190 member countries. It was created after World War II to stabilize the global financial system. Sounds noble, right? Here's how it actually works. When a country is desperate, the IMF offers them a loan. But these loans come with conditions. Always. They're called structural adjustment programs, and they typically require the borrowing country to cut government spending, which usually means cutting healthcare, education, and pensions, privatize public assets, sell your water systems, your power plants, your national resources to foreign corporations, open your markets to foreign competition, which often destroys local industries, devalue your currency, making imports more expensive for ordinary citizens. These conditions are presented as necessary reforms. But here's what really happens. In the 1980s, the IMF loaned money to dozens of African and Latin American countries. Those countries are still paying off the debt. Their economies never recovered. In 2010, Greece faced a debt crisis. The IMF, along with the European Union, offered a bailout. The conditions? Greece had to slash pensions by 40%. Unemployment hit 27%. A quarter of the population fell into poverty. The IMF called it a success because Greece kept making its debt payments to international banks, the same banks represented on the IMF's board. Here's something they don't advertise. The IMF uses a voting system based on financial contributions. The more money your country puts in, the more votes you get. The United States has about 17% of the votes. That's enough to veto any major decision, because major decisions require 85% approval. So the IMF is technically an international organization, but in practice, it can't do anything the U.S. doesn't approve of. And who's the second largest voting bloc? European countries, when you add them together. This means the Western financial powers have veto control over the lender that desperate countries turn to in crisis. Is it starting to make sense now? Let me connect these pieces for you. The BS sets global banking standards. Central banks around the world implement those standards. When countries deviate or face crisis, the IMF steps in with conditions that force them back in line. And if anyone tries to operate outside this system, SWIFT cuts them off. It's not a conspiracy. It's architecture. The system was designed this way. After World War II, The victorious powers built institutions to manage global finance. Those institutions still exist. They've grown more powerful, and they operate with less oversight than ever before. Here's a fact that should chill you. None of these institutions have changed their fundamental structure in decades, even though the world economy has completely transformed. The BS operates under a charter from 1930. SWIFT started in the 1970s and still uses the same governance structure. The IMF's voting system still reflects the economic power balance of 1945. We're living in a 21st century economy governed by 20th century institutions, accountable to 19th century power structures. Let me make this personal for a second. I've got 2 kids. I've been saving for their college education for years. Every month, money goes into that fund. But here's what haunts me. The decisions being made in Basel, in Washington, D.C., at the ECB, at the IMF, those decisions determine whether that fund will actually be enough when my kids turn 18. If central banks keep printing money, tuition might double. If they raise interest rates too fast, the economy might crash, and that fund could lose 40% of its value overnight. I'm doing everything right, saving money, being responsible. But none of it matters if the people controlling the money supply make the wrong call. And I can't vote them out. I can't protest outside the BIS because they have immunity. I can't even find out what they're discussing because their meetings are secret. This isn't about my retirement or my kids' education. This is about the fact that we've surrendered the most important decisions in modern life to people who we never chose and who never have to answer for their failures. Here's the broader picture. The global middle class has been getting crushed for 40 years. In 1971, the U.S. ended the gold standard. That's when money stopped being backed by anything physical. It became pure faith, fiat currency. Since then, wages have stagnated in most developed countries while asset prices have exploded. Houses that cost $50,000 now cost $500,000. College tuition has increased 1,200%. Why? Because when you can print unlimited money, that money flows to whoever's closest to the printer. Big banks get first. They buy assets. Prices go up. By the time that money reaches ordinary workers through wages, everything's already more expensive. The technical term is Cantillon effect, but you don't need jargon to understand it. The system is rigged, not because of some shadowy conspiracy, but because of how it was built. In 2008, someone published a paper describing a new kind of money. Decentralized. No central bank needed. Peer-to-peer transactions. Bitcoin. Now, I'm not here to shill cryptocurrency, but think about why Bitcoin was created. Someone looked at the 2008 financial crisis, saw central banks print trillions to bail out the banks that caused the crisis, saw ordinary people lose everything, and said, there has to be another way. The establishment hated it. Central banks called it a scam. The IMF warned countries not to adopt it. Financial regulators try to ban it. Why? If Bitcoin is such a joke, why do the most powerful financial institutions in the world spend so much energy fighting it? Because it represents an alternative. A system where nobody controls the money supply. Where transactions can't be censored. Where governments can't inflate away your savings. The fact that central banks and the BS are now rushing to create their own digital currencies tells you everything. They saw the threat. Now, they're trying to digitize money while keeping control. Central bank digital currencies would give monetary authorities the ability to track every transaction, freeze accounts instantly, and even implement negative interest rates where your money automatically loses value if you save it. They want all the benefits of digital currency with none of the freedom. Here's what nobody wants to say out loud. This system is breaking down. China's building alternative financial infrastructure. The BRICS nations are discussing a new reserve currency. Countries are accumulating gold again. Even central banks are buying physical gold at rates not seen in decades. Why would central banks buy gold if they could just print money? Because deep down, they know that infinite money printing can't last forever. The debt levels are unsustainable. The U.S. national debt is $35 trillion. Japan's debt is 250% of their GDP. These numbers don't get better. They only get worse. And when countries can't pay their debts, historically, there are only three options: default, austerity, or inflation. Defaulting means the global financial system collapses. Austerity means cutting pensions, healthcare, and social programs until people revolt. Inflation means printing money until your currency becomes worthless. None of these are good options, but one of them is coming. Here's the fundamental issue. Money only works if people trust it. Right now, people trust the US dollar because it's backed by the world's largest military and economy. They trust the euro because it's backed by the European Union. They trust their local currency because their government says it has value. But trust is fragile. In 1923, Germans needed wheelbarrows full of marks to buy bread. In 2008, Zimbabwe printed $100 trillion notes. In 2018, Venezuela's currency became so worthless people stopped counting it and just waited. These weren't third-world countries with weak institutions. Germany was an industrial powerhouse. Zimbabwe was once prosperous. Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves. But when you give central banks unlimited power to print money, eventually they print too much. The BS, the IMF, the Federal Reserve, they'll tell you they've learned from history. They have sophisticated models now. They know when to stop. But every hyperinflation in history happened because the people in charge thought they knew better than the market. I need you to understand something. The people running these institutions aren't evil. They're not plotting world domination. They genuinely believe they're preventing another Great Depression. They think they're stabilizing markets. They see themselves as the adults in the room making hard decisions. But here's the problem with unchecked power. Good intentions don't matter when there's no accountability. When the Fed printed $5 trillion during COVID, they believed it was necessary. And maybe it was. But nobody asked if there was a better way. Nobody held a referendum. Nobody gave citizens a choice. The decision was made in a committee meeting. And now we're all living with inflation that's destroyed 20% of your purchasing power in 3 years. When the IMF forces austerity on Greece, the economists believe it's the right policy. But they're not the ones who can't afford medicine. They're not the ones whose pensions got cut. Good intentions without accountability create suffering. This isn't abstract for me anymore. Every decision I make about money, I have to factor in the risk that people I'll never meet might destroy the currency I'm saving in. When I think about retirement, I have to wonder if my pension will be worth anything in 30 years. When I look at my kids, I worry about the world they're inheriting. A world where a handful of unelected technocrats have more power over their financial future than any democratic government. That's not the world I want to leave them. But here's the thing. Most people have no idea this system even exists. They think money is something natural, like air or water. They don't realize it's a human invention. And like any human invention, it can be changed. The first step is awareness. Understanding who has the power, how they use it, and what the alternatives might be. The second step? That's up to us. So let me ask you something. If you could ask one question to the people who control the world's money supply, what would it be? Not a joke, not rhetoric. A real question that you deserve an answer to. Because they're making decisions about your money right now. In rooms you'll never enter. Following rules you never agreed to. You deserve to know what they're thinking. Drop your question in the comments. And here's mine. If printing money makes everyone richer, why do only the people closest to the printer get rich? See you in the next one.